I thought my best friend was the one person I could trust with my life, until the day she framed me for her crime. Overnight, I went from victim to villain in everyone's eyes. But what she didn't know was that I had a secret of my own, one that would turn her perfect plan into her ultimate downfall. That you gave him access to all of your life secrets, aspirations, and even weaknesses. That was me with Rachel. She was more than just my best friend. She was my sister, the person I relied on when things got tough, and the only person who truly understood me. If you had asked me back then who I would trust with my life, I wouldn't have hesitated to say her name. We met in college, two wide-eyed girls with oversized ambitions. People were drawn to Rachel because of her sharp wit, quick smile, and confidence that made them believe she could change the world. While she charmed her way through the front door, I was the one who was quieter and more thoughtful and double-checked the fine print. We fit perfectly together, somehow. Where she was bold, I was careful. Where I was cautious, she was daring. Over the years, that bond only grew stronger. We studied together, pulling all-nighters, fueled by cheap coffee and cheaper ramen, that we envisioned the careers we would pursue, the adventures we would share, and the lives we would build. We were each other's shield when life threw its punches. She held mine when my first serious boyfriend broke my heart, and I held her hand throughout her father's messy divorce. So when we both landed jobs at North Star Holdings, it felt like fate point two best friends making their way up the corporate ladder together, prepared to conquer the world. We gathered to celebrate each small victory, including promotions, bonuses, and executive recognition. We were inseparable both in and out of the workplace. However, looking back, you could see the cracks. I just didn't want to see them. It started small, like the way Rachel's eyes would linger a second too long when I got praised in a meeting, or how she'd laugh a little too hard when teasing me about my goody two-shoes habits. Once, after I pulled an all-nighter finishing a project, she smirked and said, "You know, you don't always have to play by the rules to win." At the time, I brushed it off as just her being Rachel, bold, reckless, but harmless. I didn't realize she was already setting the stage. The crime that made everything different didn't just happen. It was prearranged, meticulous, and the cruelest part, I was an excellent pawn. It was late on a Friday when it happened. The office was quiet. Most people were already gone for the weekend. Earlier, Rachel had contacted me via text to request that I return to assist her with some last-minute files for a client audit. We frequently substituted for one another, so it was not unusual. So I stayed loyal as ever, combing through spreadsheets while she darted in and out of the records room. At one point, she asked to borrow my keycard. She casually shrugged when she said, "Yours has higher clearance. It'll be faster." I didn't think twice that I handed it over, grateful just to be useful. We were exhausted, but content when we reached 10. She suggested we go to a bar to celebrate surviving another week, but I pleaded with her not to, because I just wanted to sleep. We hugged, laughed, and said we would see each other that weekend. I didn't know it then, but that night was the last time I'd ever look at her the same way. The next morning, my phone blew up, emails, missed calls, that a frantic message from HR requesting my presence right away. My stomach churned as I rushed downtown. The entire subway ride a blur of worst-case scenarios. Two suit-clad men from corporate security escorted me into a chilly conference room when I arrived, not from HR. A laptop was sitting on the table, and on its screen were spreadsheets and bank records that I had never seen before. Offshore accounts, large transfers, fraudulent contracts. My name was on them all. "You've been implicated in an embezzlement scheme against North Star Holdings," one of the men bluntly stated to Emily Lane. I froze. The words didn't make sense. Implicated? Embezzlement? Me? I tried to laugh it off and try to explain there must be a mistake. But then they showed me the access logs, my keycard, my late-night activity, security footage of me entering restricted rooms. It was airtight, undeniable. And then they brought her in, Rachel. Her eyes were wide with carefully practiced fear, and her face was pale. She wouldn't even look at me. Instead, she told them she had grown concerned about my unusual behavior over the past few months, how she tried to get involved, but I ignored her. How she suspected I was in too deep with something illegal. I was unable to breathe. I couldn't even say anything. My best friend, my sister, was standing there, painting me as a criminal. And the worst part? She was believed by everyone. Within hours, I was suspended, my accounts frozen, and my reputation shredded. By the end of the week, I was in handcuffs, charged with fraud, facing the very real possibility of prison. The world I had built, the life I had worked so hard for, crumbled overnight. Colleagues stopped answering my calls. Friends avoided me like I carried the plague. Even though my family was there for me, they looked at me with doubt, as if somewhere deep down they wondered if maybe Rachel was telling the truth. The problem with betrayal is that it not only takes your freedom, but also your foundation. It makes you question everything: who you are, what you stand for, and how you could have been so blind. In those initial weeks, I felt empty. I wondered whether I would ever be free again as I spent the nights staring at the ceiling of my holding cell, wondering how Rachel could do this to me, wondering why I hadn't seen it coming. However, a spark grew stronger within me as my despair grew stronger. A refusal. If Rachel thought she could bury me with her lies, she had underestimated me. I had a surprise of my own that she was unaware of. Like a scar, the first night I spent in county jail is etched in my memory. The clang of the cell door slamming shut. The smell of bleach failing to cover decades of sweat and despair. The way the thin mattress sagged under my weight, reminding me that comfort was now a luxury I no longer had. I lay there, staring at the graffiti on the wall. Names carved by the forgotten, promises etched by the broken. I was one of them now, branded guilty before my trial had even begun. Harris, my tired public defender, made an effort to reassure me. He stated, "The evidence is circumstantial," but even he did not sound convinced. "We'll fight this." But every shred of evidence pointed to me. My keycard, my logins, my fingerprints on files I didn't remember touching. Rachel's testimony sealed the coffin. She was calm, articulate, and believable. She painted herself as the loyal friend who tried to steer me away from disaster, but failed. And I sat there, powerless, listening as she turned my loyalty into a weapon against me. The weeks dragged on, with each day getting worse. My parents visited when they could, their eyes red-rimmed with worry. My mother gripped my hands through the glass and whispered, "We believe you, Emily, no matter what." But even as she said it, I caught the flicker of doubt. It gutted me. Not only had Rachel taken my freedom away from me, but also trust. I nonetheless refused to break. A whisper came from somewhere deep within. Fight. Don't allow her to win. So I started paying attention to all things. Court proceedings, evidence files, the way the prosecutors spoke, the way Rachel avoided my eyes. Little details began to stand out, details that didn't add up, like the offshore accounts. Although I was on medical leave at the time due to surgery, the prosecutors claimed that the transfers began 6 months earlier. My keycard was still in use, according to the access logs. Impossible, unless someone else had it. Then there was Rachel's account of how she warned me. She said she had confronted me in my apartment and pleaded with me to stop. However, when pressed, she was unable to describe my apartment, including neither the layout of the kitchen nor the color of the couch. Things that a true friend would be aware of. These were inconspicuous, minute cracks. However, they were everything to me. The turning point came one gray afternoon in court. The prosecution played security footage of me entering the records room after hours. The date and time on the timestamp were the same as when Rachel borrowed my keycard. I leaned forward, studying the grainy video. And then I saw it. Rachel appeared in the background for a brief moment. She shouldn't have been there. She hadn't said she was there. But there she was, her face caught in the edge of the frame, slipping away like a ghost. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the whole courtroom could hear it. She had made a mistake. She had put herself at the scene. I closed my eyes that night in my cell and relived every moment we had together. Every smile, every laugh, every betrayal disguised as kindness. And I realized something that chilled me to my core. Rachel hadn't just framed me for convenience. She had been planning this for months, maybe years. But why? The response came in fragments. A rumor I overheard from another inmate about corporate corruption, that a line buried in a newspaper article about North Star's questionable offshore dealings. Prosecutors had a quiet discussion about the bigger fish they wanted to catch. Rachel wasn't just framing me. She was covering for something bigger. The realization lit a fire inside me that I wasn't just fighting for my freedom anymore, that I was fighting to expose the truth. I began jotting down everything, including memories, timelines, and inconsistencies. I wrote letters to Harris, urging him to investigate further, request records, and question things that everyone else assumed to be obvious. At first, he brushed me off, saying the court wouldn't entertain conspiracy theories. But eventually, he saw the determination in my eyes and relented. "Fine," he said. "Sign that I'll investigate. But don't get too excited." Hope was all I had left. Weeks turned into months. The trial loomed closer. Then, one morning, Harris entered the visiting room with a look of cautious excitement that I had never seen before. "You were right," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were documents connecting Rachel to shell companies linked to North Star's offshore accounts. Fake names were used to route payments. Contracts she had signed with aliases. The evidence wasn't enough to clear me outright, but it was enough to raise questions, enough to buy us time, enough to shift suspicion away from me and back where it belonged. That's when I realized I had been holding onto the surprise. Months earlier, before everything fell apart, I had started journaling conversations with Rachel. Writing helped me deal with stress, not because I suspected her. I had also once recorded her voice during a late-night strategy session, when she had made a joke about how easy it would be for her to blame me for things. I had giggled back then. Now it was evidence, albeit hazy and circumstantial evidence. It was given to Harris by me. His eyes widened as he listened. This could change everything," he murmured. "For the first time since my arrest, I felt the weight on my chest lighten. Rachel believed she was in control of me. She thought she held all the cards, but she didn't know I had been quietly building my own. I gained height the day of the next hearing. My voice was more steady. I carefully observed Rachel as she spun her perfect lies when she took the stand once more. I also saw it for the first time when Harris showed the recording, the tiniest hint of panic in her eyes. The mask was cracking. I wasn't free yet. The conflict was by no means over. But for the first time, I believed I could win, because I had the truth, and the truth was louder than any lie Rachel could tell. The courtroom became my battlefield, and every detail was a weapon that I studied Rachel's testimony like a map, tracing every contradiction, every over-rehearsed line. She had been flawless before, calm and convincing, but now there was a tension in her voice, a tightness in her smile. The recording Harris had introduced wasn't a smoking gun, but it rattled her. Additionally, I could see the cracks growing. There were beginning to be whispers outside the courtroom. Reporters who once branded me the embezzler now raised questions about Rachel. Why was it always she who found evidence? Why did she have access to so many restricted files? My burden of doubt was gradually being carried by her. Still, the prosecution pushed hard. They were not going to let their case against me fall apart without a fight. Each witness added to the narrative that I was avaricious, desperate, and willing to risk everything for money by coming forward. They painted me as someone no one really knew, a woman with hidden motives. But they didn't know me. Additionally, they had no idea what I had discovered. Harris had finally started digging into North Star's offshore accounts. The deeper he went, the stranger it became. Companies that are tied to other companies. Millions moved through accounts that didn't seem to belong to anyone real. And woven through it all, subtle fingerprints of Rachel's involvement. Emails sent at odd hours, contracts signed in rushed handwriting, traces of her IP address buried in metadata. It was not sufficient to demonstrate a pattern, but it was sufficient for an open and closed case. Enough to hint that maybe, just maybe, the wrong woman was sitting at the defendant's table. After a particularly exhausting day in court, Harris slid into my seat in the holding room one evening. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot, but there was a spark there I hadn't seen before. "You're not just up against Rachel," he said, "that you're up against something much more substantial. For many years, North Star has been stealing money. Your friend didn't just frame you to save herself. She framed you to protect the entire operation. The words hit me like a punch. Bigger, operation, that IT wasn't just betrayal anymore, that IT was a conspiracy. Why me? I asked, my voice raw. Why not someone else? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Because you were perfect. Pristine record, rule follower, that no one would suspect you. Until the evidence said otherwise. Rachel also knew that you would never fight dirty. That was her assurance. I sat there stunned as the pieces locked into place. Rachel hadn't just chosen me because I was convenient. She had chosen me because she knew me better than anyone. She knew I'd trust her. She knew I'd hand over my key card without a thought. She was aware that the betrayal would shock me so much that I wouldn't know how to respond. However, she had undervalued me. The surprise I had been holding onto wasn't just the recording. My fault. My refusal to stay broken. My refusal to let her lies define me. When Harris showed me the grainy video with Rachel's figure lurking in the background, the trial reached its boiling point. At first, the prosecution scoffed. They argued coincidence. She was there to help her friend, she said. But then Harris cross-examined her, pressing her on details she couldn't explain. Why hadn't she disclosed she was there? Why was she holding a folder she claimed not to have seen until later? Rachel's voice cracked under the pressure, just a hairline fracture, but enough for the jury to hear it. The emails then followed. Buried deep in the metadata of Northstar servers, Harris had found correspondence between Rachel and an outside consultant. The messages were vague, cloaked in business jargon, but the timing aligned perfectly with the fraudulent transfers. Additionally, a particular line sealed the deal. The scapegoat is in place. We proceed as planned. As those words reverberated, the room became silent. Scapegoat. Me. Rachel shifted in her seat, her face pale, her hands clenched. For the first time, she looked small, not the confident friend I had once leaned on, not the brilliant liar who had nearly destroyed me, but a cornered animal realizing the trap was closing. Still, the prosecution fought back. They argued the emails were circumstantial, the video inconclusive, and the recording just a joke between friends. Harris was depicted as desperate and grasping at straws by them. And maybe they were right. Maybe none of it, on its own, would have been enough. But together, it painted a picture. A picture of a woman who wasn't a loyal friend, but a calculating manipulator. A woman who hadn't just stumbled into evidence, but had orchestrated it. A woman who believed she could use my trust to build an empire of lies. The jury observed. Press members leaned in. And for the first time since my arrest, I felt the balance of power shift. However, victory was not certain. I would still be in prison. The prosecution still had mountains of evidence against me. And Rachel was not yet finished. As we walked out of the courtroom that day, I could see it in her eyes. A flash of something dark, something dangerous. She wouldn't let me win in peace. As I lay in my cell that night, I contemplated our entire relationship. The secrets whispered in dorm rooms, the dreams built over cheap wine, the laughter that once felt unbreakable. I thought about the night she borrowed my key card, the night she decided to trade our friendship for her survival. And I realized something that chilled me. Rachel hadn't just betrayed me. She had never really been my friend at all. She had been planning this for longer than I wanted to admit. Every compliment, every joke, every moment of sisterhood. It was all leverage. She had studied me like a chess player studies the board, waiting for the right move. However, the game was not over, and I still had moves left to play. The only way Rachel could respond was to wrap venom in silk and retaliate. She took the stand once more the following day, her voice steady and her eyes sparkling with practiced tears. She told the jury she had tried to protect me, that she loved me like a sister, and that she only went along with certain actions because she was afraid I'd drag her down too. She painted herself as the tragic bystander, the loyal friend forced to watch me spiral into corruption. It was an excellent performance. Seats were moved by the jury. A few even looked at me with renewed suspicion. For every crack I'd managed to expose in her armor, she knew how to patch it with charm. With a low voice, Harris leaned over to talk to me. She's good. It's too good. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because while Rachel was busy weaving her web of lies in the open, I had been weaving mine in the shadows. Not lies, but truths she never expected to see daylight. I had been waiting for a bigger surprise than a single recording or a blurry video. Rachel had confided in me more than she realized over the years. Late-night calls, tipsy confessions, and cryptic complaints about executives who didn't understand how the real money moved. I had written them all down and stored them away in journals and emails to myself. Insurance, even though I hadn't given it that perspective at the time. And then there was Sandra. Before my arrest, Sandra, a former North Star accountant, had been quietly investigating the company. She had reached out to me after hearing whispers of my case, certain that I wasn't guilty. Since the walls of the jail made it nearly impossible for us to speak, we had not spoken much, but Harris had contacted her, and she had come through. The morning Sandra appeared in court, Rachel's confidence wavered. Sandra was calm, precise, and armed with documents that laid bare the fraud. She led the jury through the offshore transfers, fake invoices, and shell companies. She demonstrated to them how Rachel's login credentials corresponded to suspicious activity and how her signatures appeared under various aliases. And then Sandra dropped the bombshell. Rachel hadn't acted alone. She was tied to a network of executives skimming millions from North Star's accounts. That I wasn't the thief. I was the scapegoat. The courtroom erupted. The prosecution rushed, raising objections at every opportunity. But the harm was already done. For the first time, Rachel wasn't the accuser. She was the accused. I watched her face as Sandra spoke. The color drained from her cheeks. Her jaw clenched, as if it were all that would keep her from falling. She clung to the edge of the witness stand. But still, she fought back. When Harris cross-examined her, she turned vicious. She accused me of manipulating Sandra and of orchestrating an elaborate frame job against her. She's obsessed with me, Rachel spat, her mask slipping for just a moment. She's always been jealous, always wanted what I had. Now she's trying to destroy me because she couldn't stand being second best. The words cut deeper than I expected. Not because they were true, they weren't, but because they revealed the rot at her core. To Rachel, our friendship had always been a competition. I believed that we were strengthening one another. She thought we were racing to the top, and only one of us could win. It hurt, it hurt God, but it also gave me energy, because the jury could now see it as well. The resentment, the envy, the flaws in her flawless facade. The climax came when Harris played the full recording, not just the snippet, but the entire late-night conversation. The casual and mocking voice of Rachel described how simple it would be to blame me for a crime. How she'd just need someone dumb enough to hold the bag. The room went silent. And then Harris asked the question that sealed her fate. Ms. Carter, if you were truly the loyal friend you claimed to be, why would you even joke about framing Emily for a crime? Rachel's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her silence said more than any words could. After that, the trial went on for weeks, but the tide had turned. The jury wasn't looking at me like a criminal anymore. They were looking at Rachel like a predator who had finally been unmasked. Still, the conspiracy was bigger than just her. Executives began to resign. Investigators opened new cases. The stock of North Star plummeted. It was dubbed the North Star scandal by the media, and my name was mentioned in every article, both as the accused and as the whistleblower who helped expose the truth. My hands shook so strongly when the verdict finally came that I had to hold onto the table. Not guilty. The words came out like church bells and broke a storm like thunder. My knees became brittle. Harris put pressure on my shoulder. I was free. Rachel, however, wasn't so lucky. Though she hadn't been formally tried yet, the evidence was overwhelming. There were warrants issued. Assets were frozen. Her face was plastered across every news channel. No longer the golden girl, but the villain of the story. And yet, even in her downfall, she managed one last twist. The night after the verdict, I received a call from an unknown number that I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut told me to. Congratulations, a familiar voice drawled, Rachel. You played your part well. My chest tightened. You destroyed my life. She cracked a bitterly soft laugh. No, Emily, that I gave you one without me, you'd still be sitting in that office, chasing promotions that don't matter. Now you're a hero. You have survived. They will publish books about you. Her voice dropped, almost tender. However, don't fool yourself. This isn't over. Did I built this game, and I'm still playing." She then hung up. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, trembling that my chest was full of relief, rage, and fear. She was out there somewhere running, but the truth was out too. She was powerless to stop the deceptive empire she had built. For the first time in months, I walked outside without shackles. The sun was warm on my face. The air tasted different, sharp, clean, alive. I got stares, namesakes, and even smiles from a crowd. I was no longer the victim. I was the survivor. Freedom didn't feel the way I thought it would. I imagined I'd walk out of that courtroom, arms raised, reporters cheering, the weight of months of fear and humiliation vanishing instantly. But the truth was quieter, heavier. The cameras were still there, yes. Flashbulbs popped as Harris guided me down the courthouse steps. Questions were hurled by strangers, in an effort to catch a glimpse of the woman who had survived the century's worst betrayal. Some offered microphones and phones. But inside, I was trembling that I was free, but I wasn't whole. Not yet. Interviews, legal paperwork, and hollow apologies filled the weeks that followed. Old friends who had abandoned me during the trial suddenly wanted back in my life. Former colleagues reached out with long, rambling messages about how they always knew something didn't add up. In the grocery store, the same neighbors who avoided me smiled excessively and inquired if I needed anything. It was exhausting. Everyone wanted a piece of my story, but no one wanted the truth, the real truth. Because the truth was, I still woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, hearing Rachel's voice echoing in my head. She's dumb enough to hold the bag. I still looked over my shoulder every time I left my apartment, half expecting her to be there, smirking in the shadows. Rachel was not in jail. Not yet. The FBI had picked up a case, and Sandra was working with investigators to unravel the larger conspiracy. Warrants had been issued, assets frozen, but Rachel had vanished. That no one knew if she fled the country, if she was hiding under a new name, or if she was quietly watching from some corner of the city. That was the cruelest part. She controlled the narrative even when she was defeated. Her absence made her a ghost story, a name whispered in newsrooms and board meetings. Everyone had a theory. There was no response. And me? I was left to rebuild a life in ruins. I was unemployed. North Star had dissolved into chaos, its board dismantled, its executives scattered like rats abandoning a sinking ship. My savings had been drained by legal fees. The apartment I once loved now felt like a cage, tainted by months of house arrest and endless anxiety. I was urged by Harris to leave the city and begin anew somewhere else. "You deserve peace, Emily," he said one night over takeout containers littering his office desk. "Go where no one knows your name. Don't let her live rent-free in your head." But leaving felt like running, and I'd done enough of that already. Instead, I stayed. I met with Sandra, sometimes late into the night, poring over boxes of documents she had unearthed. She became both ally and anchor, someone who understood the weight of betrayal. Together, we traced Rachel's paper trail, connecting dots that stretched far beyond North Star. Shell companies in the Caymans, Dubai real estate, in the skyscrapers of Manhattan, silent partners. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became. Rachel wasn't just a clever liar. She was the architect of a shadow-based empire. And I was no longer her victim. I was her undoing. But rebuilding my life wasn't just about chasing Rachel. It dealt with confronting oneself. I started therapy, reluctantly at first. Talking about the trial felt like tearing open wounds I'd stitched together with shaky hands. But my therapist pushed me gently to confront the truth. I had ignored the red flags for years. Because I loved Rachel and wanted to believe in her, I had excused her manipulations. I had also betrayed myself in doing so long before she ever accused me of anything. That realization hurt more than the trial, more than the headlines, and more than the betrayal itself, because it indicated that Rachel's lies were not just about me. I was complicit in my own blindness. But it also meant I could choose differently now. So I did. I reconnected with people who had stood by me quietly. The ones who didn't make headlines or demand apologies, but who slipped notes of encouragement into my mailbox, who sent letters while I was on trial, and who whispered, "I believe you," when no one else did. Their faith became the scaffolding of my new life. I started speaking, first at small community events, then at universities, and eventually on national stages. Not about Rachel, not about North Star, but about betrayal, resilience, and the danger silence that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a warning, a testament, and a way to turn pain into purpose. And yet, Rachel lingered, always Rachel. The news cycle had moved on, but every so often her name resurfaced. A sighting in Prague that a villa in Spain was sold under an alias, that a whisper that she had bought her way into another company, another empire. Each time, the FBI chased the lead. Each time, she slipped through their fingers. It was frustrating, but over time, my obsession with catching her shifted into something else: resolve. Because I realized justice wasn't just about seeing her in handcuffs. Justice was about reclaiming my life from her shadow. And I had. Rachel had not contacted me in almost a year since my acquittal. My apartment door received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, a beach, palm trees swaying, and turquoise water sparkling in the SUN that I end the corner. Scribbled in her unmistakable handwriting were 4 words: "Still playing your move." I felt a brief burst of fiery and sharp rage. But then I laughed, not bitterly, not with fear, but with clarity. Because I finally understood something Rachel never would. She could keep playing her games, running her cons, and building her empires of sand. But I didn't have to be a piece on her board anymore. I had already won. Justice had been served in court, the truth was out, and the lesson, which she never intended for me to learn, was imprinted like a stone in me. Betrayal can break you, but it can also make you stronger, sharper, and unshakable. Rachel acquired my past, but my future, that belonged to me. They say time heals all wounds. I don't believe that. Now, not anymore. Time reshapes rather than heals. The scars remain woven into the fabric of who we are. They don't disappear, but they stop bleeding. They stop defining us. In the months after Rachel's last message, I realized my story wasn't about her anymore. IT had nothing to do with North Star, the case, or even the betrayal itself. It was about what happens after the fire burns everything down. That IT was about what you choose to build in the ashes. For me, it started small. I planted a garden in the tiny patch of dirt behind my apartment. Nothing fancy: tomatoes, basil, and a stubborn row of sunflowers that leaned toward the light no matter how many storms tried to bend them. It felt silly at first, but as weeks passed, I found peace in the rhythm of it. Watering, waiting, watching green break through soil that once looked lifeless. It reminded me of myself. Then came the speaking tours. I initially declined each invitation. I didn't want to stand on a stage and be the woman who got framed. But Harris pushed me, Sandra encouraged me, and one day I said yes. I'll never forget that first talk. A room full of college students, eyes wide, notebooks open. I talked to them about friendship and betrayal, how to ignore warning signs, and how easy it is to believe lies from someone you care about. I told them about the power of truth, how it doesn't always set you free immediately, but it always, eventually, finds its way to the surface. When I finished, a young woman in the front row stood up. Her voice shook as she said, "Thank you. I thought I was crazy for what I went through with my best friend. But hearing you, I feel less alone." I realized then that my suffering had a purpose. Soon, my calendar filled. Universities, conferences, community centers. I spoke to 50 rooms and 500 in ballrooms. Each time, I saw faces shift. People recognizing pieces of their own lives in mine. Additionally, Rachel's betrayal became less of a burden with each conversation. But the truth is, she still haunted me sometimes. On nights when the city was too quiet, when the shadows seemed too deep, I'd hear her laughter in my head. I'd wonder where she was, what she was plotting, and if she ever regretted what she did. The answer I knew was no. Rachel didn't regret it. Rachel reinvented herself. And yet, the fear she once held over me no longer had teeth. Because fear only works when you believe you're powerless. And I wasn't powerless anymore. I had rebuilt. I had survived. And survival, I realized, was its own kind of justice. The time passed. The headlines faded. New scandals replaced the old. In schools of business, North Star became a cautionary tale. Harris moved on to other cases with a lot of attention. Sandra started her own investigative firm and took on one client at a time to expose corporate fraud. We still talked, still laughed, and still carried the bond of those dark days. Regarding myself, I continued to write, speak, and cultivate my gardens. I found love again, slowly, carefully, with someone who knew my scars and loved me not in spite of them, but because of them. We built a life not around fear, but around trust, the kind of trust Rachel could never understand. One evening, sitting on my porch with the sun sinking low and the scent of basil in the air, I thought back to that first night in the interrogation room. I was so helpless. How certain I was that my life would end. And I realized something. Rachel thought she had destroyed me by framing me for her crime. She thought she'd written the ending of my story. But she hadn't. She had written the introduction. Because if not for her betrayal, I might never have found my voice. I might never have seen the cracks in myself that needed healing. It's possible that I never would have stood on those stages and witnessed strangers whispering, "Me too." I was framed by Rachel for a crime, but in doing so, she revealed her own. And when the truth came out, the tables turned in a way she never saw coming. Justice was more than just the outcome. Justice was the life I built in spite of her. And if you are listening right now, and if you have ever been betrayed by a person you trusted, keep in mind that you are not powerless. Your world may be shaken by betrayal, but it does not end. The people who lie, who frame, who manipulate, they win only if you let their story be the last word. Don't let it. Create your own conclusion. For me, the lesson was simple, though it took years to learn. Trust is precious. Secure it. Give it carefully. And never, ever ignore the quiet voice inside you that whispers when something isn't right. I was too long silenced by that voice in me, by Rachel. However, it now speaks clearly. And every time I step on a stage, every time I plant a seed and watch it grow, every time I look at the people who stood by me when the world turned away, I hear that voice say the one thing I wish I had believed all along. Justice will always find its way, and so will you. Betrayed by the very person she trusted most, Emily finds herself framed for a crime she didn't commit. With her world collapsing and everyone believing the lies, she uncovers a secret that turns the tables in the most dramatic way. But here's the question. When someone you love betrays you this deeply, is forgiveness ever possible, or does betrayal erase trust forever? Add your own comment in the comment section below. And don't forget to like us and subscribe to the Famigraphic Show.